Hello. It seemed like, from what I said in my last Death Stream breakdown, that people generally wanted to see or wanted to know what my opinions were on what makes a power good, or worth it, or usable, and what kinds of interactions powers should have with each other. Which is awesome because this is a video that I was considering making for a while, and the predicament with Saren possibly not being good or just being crazy significantly nerfed because they're trying to introduce this combination thing with her is a big problem. It gives me an opportunity to talk about this. So I'm going to avoid talking about Saren as much as possible because that's not out yet, and if we get something different, it would be silly to speculate on something that is not released. But I will say, based on what we saw, it looked bad. Not saying that is what is definitely happening, but we could get that build. I hope we don't. But I have some other examples of frames that do work well, frames that don't work well. Then that doesn't necessarily mean the frame is good or bad, but I'm talking about power synergy in a single frame and across other characters, and frames that only have one good power, lots of things like that. So first, let's set some ground rules, and if you don't agree with these, we're probably not going to agree on a lot of points. So let's just go over them really quick. So, ground rules. Powers should have advantages over guns. That means that if you're going to use a power, at least, if you're going to use a power, it should have some advantage over using a gun, which can be tons of different things. It's a huge explosion. That's an advantage over a gun. A lot of guns are not a huge explosion. Buffing yourself. Guns don't do that, generally. Having a utility, making it so that you're healing, doing all kinds of other things that guns cannot do. Powers doing things that guns definitely cannot is a good starting point. Because if you are, you could just easily relegate, it being oh, I could just use a gun for this instead, and that would be better. Then the power is not going to be used, because we will just shoot people instead of using this power that is not as good as a gun. And that's just how it will work. Along with this, the power should have advantages over guns. That means that if the more situational a power is, the more crazy it should be when you're in that situation. That means if you've got, let's say, mind control. Let's say mind control. Mind control is highly situational because you don't want a little piss poor shitty enemy. You want an enemy that is a bombard, is a heavy gunner. It's significantly better in the situation where you have a heavy unit that you can control. I think mind control is maybe not as good as it should be, which is more of an AI problem than anything else. And once those things, they kind of fight better, then that would just solve it, and I think that's just, an issue with, it will just get better over time, so I don't think there's a problem with mind control necessarily. But because it is more situational, it is better when you use it in that situation. Using it on, little baby enemies is no good in its 3s and excess chaos. So, that's kind of what I mean by highly situational, is, a power is so much better when you use it the intended way. You use this on a bombard. Now all the enemies are getting blown up, and I have a bombard on my team. Or I have an Eximus. Now I have an Eximus buff. That type of... those advantages are pretty significant, and are really nice whenever you use mind control correctly. So that's kind of what I mean by highly situational. Moving on to the second point, powers should scale well. That means that your power doesn't just become garbage at level 40. If you get, power should scale, I think, up to what I wrote down is 60 to 70. I think that's the minimum that a power should scale up to. A power should perform the intended function, not function, that's not a thing, up until, the 60 to 70 range. Higher than that for more directed abilities, or, single target abilities, things like that. That 60 to 70 is just below raid level. So I think when you have a power that is maybe the basis of this, example for Saren, if you have her insane AoE poison damage that she has now, that should probably scale according to how many enemies you can hit and how much you can kill. So enemies that are level 60 to 70, you should be able to wound greatly special units, not kill them, and any like normal baby unit should instantly be vaporized still. So it's still definitely really useful, and then having like also that like I'm poisoned like reel back thing, and having like some kind of like tiny CC with that amount of damage is very, very good and important, because as I say in my second note, adding crowd control along with a little bit of damage, or adding buffs in, or giving like a power more than I do damage is a really, really good way to make powers way more useful. This is incredibly apparent with Ember as she stands now. Normally, Ember's 4 falls off really, really hard, and it's way better than it was now, but it falls off in the later levels. But if you add in her Firequake mod, it gives that ability some pretty significant crowd control. That is worth using your augment for, and augments are a little bit of a different thing where an augment needs to be worth it. Firequake is an example of an augment that is definitely worth it, is because it takes your ability from something that just really kills like a lot of like little baby enemies and stuff, to something that where it's like your damage that you're doing in your AoE is more for the crowd control at these insanely high levels, because you can take advantage of enemies being knocked down all the time, and it's really good because of that. And the damage is a nice bonus to something like that, which with Firequake, it being as powerful it is, I think would be too much for a power just baseline, but when you add in like a mod slot and an augment that you need to get from the Syndicate, those types of things, I think it's right where it should be in terms of power once you factor in that build together. I think that stuff is important, and whenever you do have a power that is just straight up damage, that damage needs to be real, like stupid, like dumb, like really insanely high, or have some large AoE or something like that. Good example of this is Mesa's 4. You go into her 4, and you get that like ramping up damage, and provided you can sustain her 4, you're just doing tons and tons and tons of damage. It's getting faster and faster. You're just ruining the days of a bunch of enemies, and it's great. That's awesome. And there are problems currently with Peacemaker that I will talk about in a second, probably at the end of these notes. But generally, you're going into a higher damage state with your power, and you're spending energy, and you're like taking away your movement in order to do so, but you can do a lot more damage than you can usually do regularly without some sort of buff or something else like that. Moving on. Synergy between powers should be useful. Okay, so the best example that I can put of this is Excalibur, who we'll talk about a little bit like more in a second. He's the first one we are going to be discussing kind of on the whole. But combining, even like if you're just by yourself, like if you're just one frame, if your powers have a synergy, that synergy should be very, very strong. And it should make it so that those two powers are just like way better because of the extra expended energy. So for Excalibur, we're going to take completely just rank 30, no mods. That's like whatever. If you use your 4 and your 2, that amount of energy will increase your damage by about triple, and that is really effective and really, really good. It's worth hitting 4 and then also using your 2, because you hit 4, you pull out the Exalted Blade. Well, this guy's really tough. You hit 2 and you get this insane increase in damage, and it just ruins enemies. Like, and along with that bonus, you blind them and give them a light stun at the beginning of Radial Blind. So even on its own, Radial Blind is good, but when you combine it with Exalted Blade, which is also good on its own, you produce this really, really great result. And then, leaning on that a little bit less, you use your 4 Exalted Blade and you use your 1, and you get that damage and an extra wave, and you get that charge that you can't be killed during. That is also like a good synergy point. Like, the weak power on Excal is his 3, and at low levels it's fine. It needs like something to keep it relevant, maybe some like more relevant crowd control, or just a change altogether I think would be appropriate. But on the whole, Excalibur works together like with himself very, very well. And then on top of that, Excal working in a team, blinding and crowd controlling your enemies is already really good. When you use more specific synergies, like with Valkyr, let's say, whenever you blind those enemies, it increases her damage, and you have this like, you just keep going in that way. like another melee focused frame, you're helping them, more synergy, great. But like the main thing here is that the higher like energy usage you're going for means way better results. That's what it should be. And that doesn't necessarily mean like strictly better results. Well, I guess it is strictly better results in a different way. Using the same power over and over again shouldn't like build on itself unless that's the intent of the power, like it is with Atlas's one. That's kind of what that power is like. It does, and like it has advantages for comboing into itself, which is really cool, and that's a neat power to have. And we'll talk a lot more about Atlas later on, a lot more. But the like what we saw, let's go back to Saren a little bit. What we saw with Saren, you'd cast your 1, which has a relatively small AoE. You'd use your 4, which would start up on an enemy, and then you hit 3 to like put the poison on your weapon, and then go hit them. That's a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy to kill one guy. Generally, if you're hitting 1 and then 4, it should kill tons of dudes. It should murder the shit out of people. And then you combine that with your 3, like risking getting in melee distance, using your energy on your melee weapon for a limited amount of time, like getting in that range, hitting them. That damage should be devastating, insane, silly bullshit. Like killing level 180 enemies, not even a big deal. That's what that should be. Moving on. Powers should be good without excessive modding. Now, this doesn't mean that a power should work at level 100 enemies because you don't have any mods, but the power should be good, right? Doesn't mean that. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean that you should not absolutely, under all circumstances, have to mod for a power. Like, it could benefit you more, but if you have to put mods into a frame, like power mods, in order to make this power better because it sucks otherwise, that's no good. So returning to Mesa, and I'm gonna like pop these down for a second to return to Mesa. Let's look at these abilities. So, orders go away, please. Okay, so there's actually a good variety of powers that are worth it and not worth it between like modded and not modded. So, a power that is definitely 100% worth it, like absolutely, Shatter Shield. 80% damage reduction for 25 seconds, plus the bullets bouncing back within 11 meters. Yeah, okay. Low-level enemies, 80% damage reduction is a lot. Absolutely, like there's no downside to that. Like, that seems like a totally reasonable thing. 25 seconds of 80% damage reduction is pretty strong, especially on modded. Like, that's nothing to complain about there. Shooting Gallery. A little bit of a weirder ability, but you get it for 30 seconds, 25% damage increase, a good range, definitely a usable ability, a little team supporty, maybe not specifically useful to you, but it's definitely doing something. You're definitely getting your energy's worth. Your 1 on Mesa, a little bit different. I think that this power would definitely be way better without the buffer limit. I think that it scales as it should without the buffer limit, because you're only using it on 1 opponent at a time. So not having a limit on how much damage you can put into it makes it scale at all levels and makes it always worth that energy that you are putting into it, and I think it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. As it is now, it's kind of just only a low-level ability, but at those low levels where it does work, and even a little bit of a higher level, maybe around 50 and stuff, you're still getting your energy's worth out of ballistic battery, even if you're spending 25 energy on it. Like, you build it up, and then you kill a strong enemy with it, and that's still worth it. Now, on the flip side of all of this, the absolute definite flip side of all of this is Peacemaker. So, as a baseline, how this ability is used and such is totally fine. Field of view, sure, fine. Damage multiplier, that's okay. But you're also, these are your other things that you're taking into account. You're not moving at all. You can't dodge. You get no maneuverability during this. It costs 15 energy per second. Per second. Every second, 15 energy. I think that's way too much. Way too much. Because, like, that's not better than a gun by a country mile. Because you can... let me make sure. I should make sure before I say the... Yeah, okay, I am right. Okay, she has 150 energy. So the maximum amount of time you're using this for is about 8 seconds. You get 8 seconds of these pistols for your entire energy pool. That's not okay. That is a huge disparity. You absolutely, under all circumstances, have to have efficiency for Peacemaker to do anything for you. To do anything. To do even a little bit of work for you. Like, 8 seconds can seem like a long time in, like, the moment of shooting. But at higher levels, especially, that is immediately useless. You have to have efficiency 100% for this, like, to ever be used. Like, not, like, every single time. Like, 10 times out of 10, you should be choosing to instead, like, go, like, Shatter Shield, Ballistic Battery. You get so much more out of it without mods. But let's look at what you get when you do mod and how things are useful. This is an enhanced, like, okay, so, looking at this. This makes the energy per second really good and worth it. Lowers your field of view a little bit. More damage. This takes it, like, 75% less. Like, 75% of the cost gone. Which brings you to, like, a good level. I think that a power like Peacemaker, with an energy pool this low, should cost, like, 10. Which I think is the same as Excalibur's Exalted Blade, which is a way more reasonable, because you can use it and then get, like, some time out of it. That extra 5 energy is a lot. That's 50% more energy than, like, other channeled abilities. That's a lot. So, like, 15 energy per second is way too much for that ability. You're not using that until you mod. You should have a power that you can still use. It's not going to be as good, obviously, because that's what mods are for. But it should still be usable. You should still be able to, like, have a reason to use it. But it's just not that way with Peacemaker. And that is just... that's the disparity between her different powers, I suppose. And, like, obviously... Here, we'll look at the abilities one more time. Her 1 immediately becomes better. Her 2, way better. Her 3, way better. Like... Those powers still retain their usefulness, and they scale actually pretty goddamn well. Like with the exception of the buffer limit on Ballistic Battery, you get some pretty good scaling out of like her. Like Shooting Gallery and Shatter Shield are great examples of awesome abilities that are just good. They're just good abilities, like they just are. Like Shatter Shield scales to a very high degree, like quite far, up to the point where enemies like don't care if you have defenses, you just die anyway, which is a problem that is more prevalent where enemies get to the point where you just die because enemies have no cap on anything. So yeah. But let's move on to another frame. Another frame that has insane potential. The potential is there. That frame is Atlas. Okay, so there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems with Atlas. And the main problem with Atlas is that his 1 is his only good ability, really. So let's look at his abilities. View stats without mods. Well, I should have done that for Mesa. Whoops. Anyway, you use his 1, it costs 25. And it costs less the more you like combo into it, and that's great. And you get more damage each time you do it. Awesome. It's an ability that combos within itself. That's the only one in the game so far, I think. I'm pretty sure. I think it's the only like one that does that to a significant degree by itself, without just like being like, well, Saren cast her 4 twice, it did double damage. Of course. Landslide is a lot more in-depth combinations within itself than that, as in like your first punch, like your punches are different, and you have like your length. Each punch does consecutively more damage, costs less energy. That's the kind of comboing I'm talking about between itself. And then you have his other 3 powers. And I'm going to discuss some ways that you could make these significantly better. So, you've got tectonics, a wall, and then you can push the wall. Having a wall is fine, and that's okay, but the power doesn't add in any advantage for the way that Atlas works based on his 1. So your goal with Atlas is to get in close and punch dudes. Okay. Why do you need a defensive barrier to hide behind? Because that's not the point of the frame based on the first ability. Unless you have some interesting combination of abilities. Like, for example, Tectonic's being used as a way to push yourself forward. Let's say that. Like, you could use your 2 and then use your 1 to, like, punch the wall and shoot rocks everywhere in front of you and knock a bunch of people down. Have some crowd control, have a little bit of damage. It counts as a defensive ability at first, but then when you hit your 1, you, like, break through it, do a bunch of, like, knockdowns, set people up to be hit with your 1 a bunch. I think that is way more interesting. Maybe, like, take out the rolling part altogether, be able to put up multiple walls, and you can really make Atlas more of, like, a control thing. I think that would be way more intuitive with how he is, like, using your 1 to, like, initiate a much more powerful attack, like, through your Tectonic. Like, that makes a lot more sense. It would also be just significantly more useful and more powerful. Because as it stands right now, the rolling thing is slow, buggy, weird, it doesn't do enough damage, it doesn't do anything that you want. The wall itself is fine, it scales now, it's very good, but it needs something else with it. 3, Petrify. There's not a lot you can do with it there, besides maybe being able to use Petrify on your Tectonic wall, on your Rumblers to buff them. Like, the longer you look at them, like, the longer you look at your wall, it just gets, like, more health and stronger, and you can, like, shoot your beam through it and, like, freeze guys on the other side. Do a lot of stuff like that. Have minor combinations or buffs for your other, like, rock-based abilities. Or whenever enemies are petrified, Landslide gets a bonus, like, to damage. That stuff, actually, you know, there are actually quite a few different ways you could go about Petrify being worked into these other abilities. I didn't really consider Petrify that useful before now. I kind of just thought of all of that just suddenly. Anyway, Rumblers. Rumblers are an ultimate. They cost 100 energy. It's a lot. They last 45 seconds, and they're pretty strong at the lower levels. But here's the interesting thing about Atlas. Atlas doesn't have any, like, way to sustain himself or any, like, defensive abilities beyond Tectonics, which right now doesn't really synergize well with his I want to punch you really hard kind of playstyle. So it would be very interesting if you could summon the Rumblers, and they could be separate from you if you choose that. But for an additional cost of energy, you would hit 4, summon your Rumblers, look at them, and hit 1, and then wear them. Similar to the way Iron Skin works, but maybe give you some other boosts as well. Like, you would gain their health pool, and, like, your armor would combine, and, like, do some, like, interesting stuff that way, and you would be using the Rumbler as, like, an outfit. Maybe restrict yourself to only using your 1 while you're in that state, but it would give you, like, a way to engage and, like, go in, and you'd still have the other Rumbler with you. So you'd just be able to, like, punch the shit out of dudes and have a way to be defended, because the Rumblers have a significant amount of health, and if you combine your health, plus the Rumbler health, plus their armor, which scales with your armor, and then combine it on yours, you have, like, actually a pretty tough ability that's hard to take on for, like, quite a while. And then even, like, beyond that, using the, like, Rumbler, like, your Rumbler has a time limit, obviously. You could, like, use it again, and then the explosion happens, which could be more powerful if you're wearing it. Or, like, whenever it would break, instead, like, the other Rumbler dies. Like, having some way to defend like that. I think that would make Atlas A significantly better, and, like, just be more fun. Like, those changes would make his kit just be so, like, combined. It'd make 1, 2, 3, 4, all those powers constantly used. Like, oh, you started up Rumblers, get inside the Rumbler, oh, Tectonics, and, like, shoot the shotgun wall out, and just do some, like, awesome combinations of abilities that would look really good. Doing that kind of stuff, like, makes it worth it. Like, you hit 4, and you use 100 energy. 100 energy is a lot of energy. It's a little meaty, like, the Rumblers are okay on their own, and that's fine. But if you add in these interesting combinations, they become significantly better. Because you Rumblers, and then you get in with 25 energy, which is relatively low, but you get in and it becomes significantly more powerful, and that's what would make it, like, worth it. Like, you could have these minions, and that would be fine, but then combining would be this great advantage, and that's what you would want. So I think Atlas could be made so significantly, like, better and more fun by doing stuff like that. But let's look at some frames that have generally really good cohesive kits, like, at least for the most part, like maybe leaving one power out some of the time. One of the good examples of that, just for a general build, is Mirage. Now, Mirage has a distinct advantage in using guns for a lot of her damage, but just generally her abilities work really well together and work off of each other really, really well. Her one, Hall of Mirrors, it goes with Eclipse. Eclipse is a power that is always good, even on its own. You add Hall of Mirrors, you're doing more damage. It's just good. And then on top of that, you can cast Prism. Prism flying above you, doing like a bunch of stuff. It can explode into like a big blinding area to help you like just have enemies opened up for being attacked all the time. I think one of the minor problems with Prism is that it has sort of the same problem as Embers 4 did, where you cast it and it's like a toggle ability, but it has a timer on it. I think it should just go forever. I think it would make sense. And it's obviously fine as it is. Mirage is a very good frame, but I think if you have a toggle ability, it should just be turn it on, and then you turn it off whenever you want. I think that makes a lot of sense. But just in general, the kit, you want to use all of these powers except for Sleight of Hand, which is a stupid gimmicky ability like Bounce Pad that just sucks and is terrible. It's just a bad ability. Like it gets rid of ammo on the ground. Like it's so situational and does like nothing for you. Even in the situation where it's good, like on a Corpus Laser Door, you hit 2 and you get some energy back. But you spend so much time doing this that there's no point in doing it. Like, it's not like you hit 2 on a Corpus Laser Door and then you ran through it and you're max energy now. That would be crazy. That would be like, oh, in this situation, I'm max energy. That's awesome. But it's not in that way. You gain like a couple energy for standing in the lasers and just chilling out. And it's not effective. Like, what you get out of like ammo packs being on the ground that you blow up, you lose ammo, which is stupid. You spent energy to lose ammo, and it does minimal damage at best. None of that stuff is good. Her 2 is awful. But the rest of her kit works together very well. I think Sleight of Hand just needs to go to bring in just an ability period. No one uses Sleight of Hand at all. So there's that. Moving on. What one was next? Oh, yes, Hydroid. Hydroid is another one that has a lot of potential. And I'm only going to give one more example after this one, which is another frame that works really well within itself. But, yeah, we're going to talk about Hydroid. Where is he at? Hydroid, you never get played because you are bad. Am I blind? I think I'm blind. I think I've gone blind. There he is. Okay, awesome. Alright, so Hydroid is another frame like Atlas that has a ton of potential, but doesn't meet it. So, there are good abilities here, but there's like, they're inconsistent, which has been patched up a little bit with the recast ability that we have gotten recently. But just in general, I think his kit could be more effective, like, in a different way. So, you use Undertow and you become a pool. And there's some augments and stuff that can make that more useful, and you bring enemies inside. That's fine, but it's really only good for like indefinitely holding a point against Infested, which I guess it's okay. You still have to like come out of the pool and kill some dudes. But think about this scenario. Think about this scenario where Hydroid's powers work together. You hit your 3, and there's some enemies over there that are attacking your buddies. You are in your 3. So you're using energy constantly to damage these enemies that you've gotten into your pool. And that's fine. That's totally okay. That's an alright ability. That's totally normal and fine. But what if you were also able to use your 2 while you were in your 3 and chain them together? You could Tidal Surge and grab a bunch of enemies, and then they are also in your Undertow, and then you can just move around by using Tidal Surge. This makes it more important, like how much duration you have, first of all, to make Tidal Surge more controllable, but cost more energy to be more controllable, because you have to cast it multiple times. And then also on top of that, be able to like hit 3, and then also be able to hit 4 to deal a bulk damage to the enemies you have in your pool, and then also summon the tentacles around you. That gives you, that's just good combinations. And then like being able to use like Tempest Barrage. Tempest Barrage could also damage enemies in your pool, and then be able to like cast on location wherever you're looking, like just combining, having your abilities work more together to do more for you, and to make Hydroid more defensive and like crowd control-y. Like you go into your 3 and they can't hurt you. You're using a lot of energy to do this, but you're invincible while you're doing it. It's like you hit 3, it's like, alright, I'm gonna constantly be draining energy. I can't do this forever. That's not gonna happen. I can't do this forever. And then you just like wave through enemies, gather them all up, use your Tentacle Swarm to do a bunch of damage to them, use your 1 also, like crowd control some enemies that are kind of out of your Tidal Surge's reach, and do some more interesting like battlefield tactics between like combining these powers. Like that is the synergy that you want. That's akin to Exalted Blade plus Radial Blind, because the effects that you get are significant whenever you combine these powers, and it would be incredibly fun to be able to do. Because Tidal Surge on its own is really fun. You're left vulnerable, like you're vulnerable at the beginning and the end of it, so you can't like hit 3 and then Tidal Surge and then hit 3 again, because it doesn't flow well and you can be shot in between it. And like you can't keep your Undertow enemies, and like you'd be able to move your Undertow enemies around, like move them to an open area and then like let them loose, and then someone with an Ogress shoots them. Like it'd be great doing stuff like that, and just having like the potential is there for your kit to be so much better. Which, I mean, that's subjective, but I think it would be significantly more fun, and it would bring Hydroid like quite far up in like terms of usefulness. I don't think he would even be like, it wouldn't be broken or anything. It would just be like a kit that's totally usable. You could totally, it's like, yeah, absolutely, I'll use Hydroid. Hydroid seems like a fun time, because right now he's just a bad choice. Like in general, like if you're going into like a T4, he doesn't scale. Nothing. He has like a little bit of crowd control. His 3 is okay in infested defense, like only. And that's just not great. So he could be a lot better, and like combining his powers would help him out a lot. So there's one more frame that is kind of, what am I looking for here? It's kind of the, it's like, it seems to be sort of the root of combining powers and how those become useful. And it probably won't be that surprising that the frame is Loki. There's a reason that Loki is regarded as so good, and it's not even that I particularly like playing as him, but his kit, the way it works together, is incredibly strong. All of his abilities are pretty good on their own, some less than others. And the more, like, you use it in such a way that it just is very effective. So let's examine why Loki's kit works. His 1, it's a decoy. On its own, having a distraction for a frame that is as not tanky at all as Loki is very squishy is great. Having a distraction is awesome. I think maybe the decoy should have the type of scaling like Frost Bubble Shield. I think that would be very effective. I think even Saren's Molt should have that as well. I think that's a very good way for defensive abilities that are distracting or protecting of an area like Frost Snow Globe. That's a good way for them to scale more into the end game. But obviously Loki doesn't really need any buffs right now. He's one of the best frames in the game by far. So decoy on its own is fine. Doesn't scale maybe as well as you'd like it to, but it combines with a lot of your other abilities. So you can decoy as you would be coming out of invisibility to give you a more safe way to go back into invisibility. Invisibility on its own is like fine. Like you're using a relatively small amount of energy to go completely invisible for 12 seconds. Obviously this gets way better whenever you're modding in relation to your entire kit, and that's fine. Moving on, he's got Switch Teleport. Switch Teleport is the weakest of his abilities, but if it costs less energy, it would still be totally fine. It costs, like, I think it costs 50. And that's fine. It has a huge range, it's a short stun, and it can move you from place to place. And the interesting thing about that is you can decoy and switch to teleport yourself across the map and leave a decoy where you were that enemies will be shooting at. And that's really effective. If it costs less energy, it would be significantly better. This is probably Loki's weakest ability, but it's still not a bad ability, and it scales indefinitely. Like, if you need to bring, like, an enemy out of a crowd, you can go invisible, switch with them to, like, here he is, teammates, and then you murder him super hard. That stuff just works, and it's fine for that kind of stuff. Then you have his 4. Now, Radial Disarm is actually a bit of a short-ish range if you're not using, like, crazy modding. But the effect is very, very strong, so it should have a bit of a shorter range than, like, the highest range powers. And the damage of it is only on infested-type enemies, which is still fine. Like, it's an alternative to this otherwise very strong ability. It's situationally a little worse than being normally incredibly good. So that's totally fine. So with this, you are able to use your 2 invisibility to get in the middle of a big crowd and take all their guns away. And then with the augment, you also confuse them and make them fight each other. That's great. Being able to, like, radial disarm makes it so that it's a defensive crowd control skill that just helps you and your team in, like, every way. Like, all of Loki's abilities, you're constantly using all of them for the most part. Like, a lot of people stick with just invisibility and radial disarm, and that's fine. Those are arguably his strongest abilities, but it's not to say that they're never going to use decoy and switch teleport, especially in combination with one another at, like, really high, like, efficiency levels, because using that teleport is very effective. And then these are the stats that I have, obviously, on my Loki. And these things obviously get very, very strong. I think if decoy scaled, having this much power duration would actually be very effective. Obviously, invisibility for 25 seconds. Great. Awesome. Switch teleport, having that much range is actually not a thing. I think you can only target up to 50 meters. But no one can argue it just costs less with my build, and that's fine. And then Radial Disarm, giving it more range. Like, with mods, well, the way that I build it, I've just taken all of his abilities and just made them all markedly better. They scale more. They do more things. I've just taken what is used normally and just made it more. Just made it better. And, like, I'm not sacrificing any of these abilities on the altar of death. And none of his abilities are so bad that they're completely unusable, or that it will never be used. They're so situational that they suck. And on that topic, I picked one frame to talk about that has powers that are too situational. And before I tell you what frame it is, I'm going to, like, reiterate probably a couple times, I'm not saying this frame is bad. In fact, this frame is very good. It's just that they have a lot of powers that are too situational. Like, they're just way too much, way too situational, or are too, like, awkward and weird to use that you just don't use, like, more than half of them. And that frame is Equinox. So Equinox has a ton of problems. Like, a ton of problems. Like way too many problems. In that 6 of her 7 powers are just not used. Like, or are used so little they might as well not be there. Right now, okay, so she is the unique frame that has 7 powers, and this is probably the most extreme case of this because she has so many useless abilities. I'm going to reiterate before people tell me, well, MAME is so good. MAME is so unbelievably good. It's the reason that we can go to, like, level 3,000 enemies. It's so crazy. Yes, I agree. MAME is nuts. 2 Equinoxes trading their MAME back and forth is incredibly strong. But both of those Equinoxes are in day form, never leaving day form, which means immediately on what is considered the best thing you can do with Equinox, you are not using 4 powers, because you're never metamorphosizing. You're never using 4 of her 7 powers, just baseline. And the reason for that is because Rest is super weak, Pacify is super weak, Mend is super weak, and they're bad. The best one of the bunch there is Rest, which is barely okay. And it costs a bunch, and it takes you energy to move between these forms, and it takes time to move between these forms. And because your abilities are toggles, your 2 and your 4 and your 3 are toggles. So that means once you've toggled these abilities on, it behooves you, especially with Maim, 100%, to not switch to your other form because you're toggled in and you need to get value that you're inputting the energy of out of that ability before you would switch. But it doesn't matter because the day form is the only one that does anything, because Maim is so crazy good. But even not considering that, let's take Maim out of the equation. You'd never play this frame, period. Because Provoke is terrible. It's got such a huge disadvantage, and it's not a left-handed ability, so you can't shoot and use it at the same time. So no one's going to use that ability. Or wait, no, that's Rage. I'm thinking of Rage. I mixed up Rage and Provoke. Rage. So you, it's an ability that pauses you, takes you out of zoom, you use it on them with your hand, like this, and then they're faster, it's easier for them to kill you, they take more damage, but because it's not a left-handed ability... My camera is reversed. This is my left hand, I promise you. Because it is not a left-handed ability, that means that you're not able to combine it even with your gun in a coherent way that you should be able to do. With Rest, it's not as much of a problem because it's a straight-up stun, but even still, it should be a left-handed ability. And Metamorphosis should be instantaneous, just boom, you're in the other one. Or alternatively, maybe there's this crazy idea that whenever you use Metamorphosis, it's affected by duration, and you're in your combined form for quite some time. And then in your combined form, you could do something interesting, like use the double variants of your powers at the same time. Wouldn't that be crazy? Wouldn't it be so awesome if you had to keep using Metamorphosis, being able to refresh it every once in a while, to keep yourself in your combined form, to have Mend and Maim both on your 4 on a combined cost, instead of just staying in your day form. And then, whenever you burst for all your damage, you're also healing your teammates, which is just a great bonus on top of that. And then, Pacify and Provoke, you're giving your team defensive abilities, and you're increasing their power strength. Increasing their defense is okay, but also increasing their power strength is a bit situational, but still good if you're doing both. And then if you do Rest and Rage combined into one ability where you hit them and they're asleep and they take more damage, they're faster, but whenever you're using this interesting combined form, that's not bad suddenly. Suddenly that's totally fine. So here's the interesting, weird thing about it. Is why is it not like that? Because you don't need to change anything about these powers. You need to change literally none of Equinox's kit. You need to change nothing. No values between any of her actual powers. Just her gimmick. Just her Metamorphosis. By making it so that Metamorphosis is an ability that you want to continually be, periodically be using to make sure you're in your combined state. That makes Equinox more of a caster, and it means that she's at a huge disadvantage when she's out of energy and not able to Metamorphosis, and, be getting those bonuses. Because Metamorphosis also gives you, a damage multiplier, shield capacity, speed increases. If you were just be I'll give myself, a bit of a general buff for 40 seconds modded, let's say. What's my with mods? So whatever. I haven't messed with Equinox very much. I don't remember what my build is for. It's probably a main build. It's just really frustrating that it's so easy to fix Equinox, but the way she is now is she's literally the Maim frame. That's what she is. You use 2 Equinoxes with Maim to go stupid far in endless stuff, because her Maim scales stupid indefinitely, millions on millions on millions of damage and a huge AoE that is tradable between Equinoxes. And, like, that's fine and cool, but if you just... Like, just what I just said, making that metamorphosis, like, combined, now you're using both of your abilities at the same time. What a fucking, like, way to be. Like, what a thought. What a thought that you would have some way to use your abilities, your combined abilities. Like, be like, oh, I'm using Rest and Rage. Like, I use Metamorphosis to go into this form, and then I Rest and Rage that guy. That's a good ability. That is a good-ass ability right there. That is a good, like, absolutely. It has a tiny little range, and that's totally fine. Like, having a tiny little baby range, because you're picking an enemy, and him and his little buddies, like, in a short area around him, super die. Like, that makes this whole thing worth it. Like, being able to use Pacify and Provoke at the same time. Damage reduction on yourself and your allies around you, and then also a strength increase. Yes. Like, because when you're doing that, like, if you're using, like, Pacify, Provoke, and Rest and Rage, like, in combination, like, you're using a lot of energy to do this, but, like, your general effectiveness goes up greatly. And I don't know, I could go on and on about why I think Equinox should be like that, because it would just be just better in every possible way. But I think that this video is maybe getting a little long, so I'm just going to leave it there on some examples of what bad powers are, and, like, ways to combine abilities that we currently have. And, like, I can go into more depth on other frames that just have super wasted potential, like Vauban, but I think I'm just gonna leave it there. I think I've kind of, like, made my point on what makes a power worth it. You need, like, I'll bring up these ground rules. Ooh, there you go. Like, powers should have advantages over guns. I think we can all agree on that. Like, they should have advantages. They shouldn't be markedly, like, just better no matter what, because that sucks when guns are better no matter what. So there should be situations where both are needed, because this is a game where you have both. Obviously, that should be the case. I think we can all agree on that. Powers should scale well. You should not have to stop using your powers because you're at higher level content. I think we can all agree on that. Synergy between powers should be useful. Whenever you're combining abilities, it should be great. It should feel awesome to be able to be combining these abilities and doing more things. I think that's easily agreeable. And powers should be good without excessive modding. So you should have powers be fine when you're not modding specifically for them. They should be usable still. They shouldn't be OP broken, just busted crazy, but they should be good. You should be able to do the thing. Like, if you are just at a fine, like, whatever, I'm just using health mods and stuff, if you're not, like, super far in the game yet, you shouldn't get a frame and then be like, oh, well, this is unusable until I have X. Because that's not fun. And I think that we can agree on all of those things. Hopefully. If you disagree with me, tell me why. I really like hearing what other people's opinions are on, like, how power should work or how guns should work. But I think for the most part, people would probably agree that these ground rules are pretty fair. But tell me if you think otherwise, and if you want me to go over maybe more frames that I think, like, tweaks that would be good on this frame or that frame, or stuff like that. Just tell me what you want to see. So yeah, that's gonna wrap this one up, I think. I've been rambling for quite some time. Thank you for watching, and if you're at the end of this video, I'll see you tomorrow.